She found $1 million in a forgotten suitcase. Her manager told her to hand it over, but she saw the greed in his eyes. The Black Hotel maid knew that to do the right thing, she would have to break every rule, risk her job, and hunt down a ghost, never suspecting she was about to change her life forever. To the wealthy, transient guests of the Grand Majestic Hotel, she was a pair of hands in the hallway, a polite, averted gaze, a quiet, good morning. Sarah Jenkins, at 48, was a housekeeper, a woman whose life was a study in quiet efficiency. She moved through the opulent suites with a meticulous grace, her hands, worn from a lifetime of hard work, expertly smoothing Egyptian cotton sheets and polishing marble vanities until they gleamed. Each perfectly folded towel, each dust-free surface, was a small, anonymous testament to her pride. The hotel's general manager, a man named Mr. Thompson, saw her as a cog in his machine. He was a man with a cheap suit that was always a little too tight, a smug smile, and eyes that were constantly calculating. He was a petty tyrant who skimmed from the staff's tip pool and was rumored to have a special manager's fee for any valuable items left in the lost and found. He particularly enjoyed making Sarah's life difficult, seeing her quiet dignity as a personal challenge to his authority. They saw a simple, hard-working maid. They never suspected they were looking at a woman who was waging a quiet, desperate war to keep her son in college, a woman whose unshakable integrity had been forged in the crucible of a difficult life. They did not know that her greatest strength was not the perfection of her work, but the clarity of her character. The crisis began on a Tuesday afternoon, in the hushed, sun-drenched quiet of the presidential suite. The guest, a mysterious and intensely private man who had checked in under the alias Mr. Black, had just checked out. Sarah was tasked with the final cleaning before the suite was prepared for the next arrival. She moved through the rooms with her usual, practiced care, stripping the bed, clearing the bathroom, her mind already on her second job as an evening office cleaner. And then, she saw it. Tucked away in the back of the deep walk-in closet, almost hidden behind a shoe rack, was a simple, black, hard-shell suitcase. It was nondescript, with no identifying tags, the kind of luggage that could belong to anyone. It was a common enough occurrence. Guests forgot things all the time. The hotel's protocol was clear and absolute. All lost items were to be immediately turned over to the lost and found, which was managed directly by Mr. Thompson. Sarah picked up the suitcase. It was surprisingly heavy. She carried it into the main room, her intention to follow the rules, to call the front desk, and have it taken downstairs. But she hesitated. She thought of the expensive watch a guest had left behind last month, a watch that Mr. Thompson had logged, but that had never been seen again. She thought of the whispers among the staff, the quiet, resentful knowledge that anything of value that passed through the manager's hands had a way of disappearing. This was different. This felt important. With a sense of trepidation she couldn't explain, she laid the suitcase on the massive king-sized bed and undid the latches. The lid popped open with a soft hiss. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The suitcase was filled, not with clothes, but with stacks of money. Neat, tightly bound stacks of $100 bills. It was an impossible, life-changing amount of cash. She had never seen so much money in her life. It was more than she could earn in 20 years of scrubbing floors and making beds. It was her son's entire college tuition, his future, right there in a black plastic box. Her first thought was of the rules. Call the manager. Hand it over. But her second thought, cold and sharp, was of Mr. Thompson's greedy, calculating eyes. She knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the marble beneath her feet, that if she handed this suitcase over, the mysterious Mr. Black would never see it again. The money would be absorbed into the black hole of Thompson's corruption, and she would be a silent, unwilling accomplice to the theft. She was at a crossroads. To follow the rules would be to do the wrong thing. To do the right thing, to ensure this fortune was returned to its rightful owner, she would have to break every rule. She would have to risk her job, the very job she depended on to keep her own small world from collapsing. She looked at the stacks of money, then at the phone on the bedside table. She thought of her son, of the sacrifices she had made for him. She thought of her own quiet, unshakable belief in right and wrong. With a decision that was both terrifying and liberating, she closed the suitcase. She did not call the front desk. Instead, she pushed the suitcase back into the deepest, darkest corner of the closet, hidden behind a row of heavy winter coats left in storage. Then, with her heart pounding a frantic, rebellious rhythm against her ribs, she walked out of the suite, a simple housekeeper who had just become the secret guardian of a lost fortune. The decision to hide the suitcase was a silent declaration of war against the small, corrupt world that had tried to define her. Sarah Jenkins, for the first time in years, was not just a housekeeper. She was an operative on a mission of her own making. The fear that had initially gripped her was now being replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Her first challenge was securing the asset. The presidential suite's closet was a temporary solution, but it was too risky. The suite would be occupied again within days, and a routine cleaning would surely uncover the hidden luggage. She needed a better hiding place, a ghost location within the hotel's vast, complex ecosystem. She found it in the sub-basement, a place even most of the staff avoided. Down a dusty, seldom-used corridor, behind a series of rusted water heaters, was a small, forgotten linen closet that hadn't been opened in years. The lock was old and stiff, but Sarah, who had learned a thing or two about stubborn mechanisms from a lifetime of fixing things herself, managed to jimmy it open with the metal stay from an old binder clip. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old, dry cotton. It was the perfect hiding place, a tomb for forgotten things, a place no one would ever think to look. Under the cover of the late-night shift, when the hotel was a quiet, sleeping giant, she retrieved the suitcase. She moved through the service corridors and elevators like a shadow, her housekeeping cart providing the perfect cover for the illicit cargo, hidden beneath a pile of freshly laundered towels. She secured the suitcase in the forgotten closet, locking it behind the rusted door, a silent guardian of $1 million secret. Now came the harder part, finding the owner. Her only clues were the alias he had used, Mr. Black, and her own sharp, practiced observations. She began to build a profile of the man in her mind. He was wealthy, obviously, but he traveled without the usual entourage of assistants and security. He was intensely private, using an alias and leaving almost no personal trace in his room. But he had made a few small, human slips, and it was in those slips that Sarah began her hunt. She remembered the book on his bedside table. It had been a worn, leather-bound copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Not the kind of book a flashy, new-money billionaire would read. This was the reading of a man interested in philosophy, in stoicism, in the quiet, internal life. She also remembered the specific type of tea he had ordered from room service, a rare, single-estate oolong, a choice that spoke of a refined, specific taste. Her final clue was the suitcase itself. While it had no identifying tags, she had noticed a small, almost invisible maker's mark embossed in the leather near the handle, a stylized art inside a circle. It was not a brand she recognized. Her shift at the hotel ended at 11 p.m., but her work was just beginning. Instead of going home to her small apartment, she went to the 24-hour branch of the public library. Surrounded by the quiet, sleeping forms of the city's homeless seeking refuge from the night, she sat at a computer terminal and began to dig. She started with the maker's mark. After an hour of searching through obscure luxury goods forums, she found it. The mark belonged to a small, ultra-exclusive artisan leatherworks company based in London named Reynard, a brand that prided itself on its anonymity and catered only to a handful of discreet, long-time clients. It was another piece of the puzzle. Her Mr. Black was not just wealthy, he was old money, a man who valued craft and privacy over flashy logos. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Mr. Thompson's suspicion had been piqued. The official report from the presidential suite's cleaning had listed no items left behind. But Thompson, a man with a sixth sense for opportunity, felt that something was off. The guest had been mysterious, his stay brief, his checkout abrupt. It was the perfect setup for a valuable, forgotten item. He found Sarah the next day as she was stocking her cart. "The penthouse," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp and probing. "Anything unusual? Did Mr. Black leave anything at all behind? A watch? A cufflink? Sometimes guests forget the smallest things." "No, sir," Sarah replied, her voice even, her expression a mask of polite neutrality. The room was completely clear. "I checked twice, just as the protocol requires." Thompson stared at her for a long moment, a predator sensing a hidden prey. Good, he said finally, his smile not reaching his eyes. You're a good housekeeper, Sarah. Meticulous. Just make sure you stay that way. The threat was unspoken, but clear. He was watching her. The pressure was mounting. Sarah knew she was in a race against time. She had to find the owner before Thompson's suspicion turned into a full-blown search of the staff's lockers and the hotel's forgotten corners. She returned to the library, her mind focused on the final clues. A reclusive, stoic philosopher who drank rare oolong tea and commissioned custom luggage from an anonymous London artisan. She began searching for profiles of wealthy philanthropists, tech moguls, and financiers, looking for a man who fit that unique, quiet profile. For hours, she found nothing. And then, in a deep dive of an old, archived article from a financial journal, she found him. The article was a profile on the legendary, press-shy tech founder, Elias Reed, a man who had made his fortune in the early days of Silicon Valley and had then vanished from public life to focus on his private foundation. The article described his eccentricities, his disdain for flashy brands, his love of Stoic philosophy, and it even mentioned his favorite, obscure brand of oolong tea. The final, clinching detail was a single photograph. It showed Reed stepping off a private jet, and in his hand, he was carrying a simple, black, hardshell suitcase with a small, circular maker's mark just visible near the handle. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had found her ghost. Finding Elias Reed's name was one thing. Contacting him was another. He was a digital ghost, a man who had meticulously scrubbed his presence from the internet, leaving behind only the faint, curated trail of his philanthropic foundation. There was no public email, no direct phone number. There was only the formal, imposing gateway of the Reed Foundation, an organization notoriously protective of its founder's privacy. Sarah knew that a call from a hotel housekeeper claiming to have found a lost suitcase would be dismissed before she could even finish her sentence. She needed a different key to open this door. She spent another long night at the library, not researching Reed, but his late wife, whose name had been mentioned in the article. She discovered that before her death, Mrs. Reed had been a passionate patron of a small, struggling inner-city youth orchestra. It was a small, personal detail, the kind of human connection that was often lost in the grand narrative of a billionaire's life. This, Sarah knew, was her way in. The next morning, from a payphone, to ensure the call could not be traced back to her, she dialed the main number for the Reed Foundation. She was met with the polite, impenetrable wall of a professional assistant. "How may I direct your call?" the cool, efficient voice asked. "My name is Sarah Jenkins," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I am calling on behalf of the Majestic Hotel's Community Outreach Program. I have a proposal for Mr. Reed concerning a potential partnership with the City Youth Orchestra, a cause I understand was very dear to his late wife." It was a brilliant, calculated lie, a piece of social engineering born of desperation and a deep, intuitive understanding of human nature. She was not calling as a housekeeper. She was calling as a peer, speaking the language of philanthropy. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Reed does not typically take unsolicited calls," the assistant said, though her tone had shifted from dismissive to intrigued. "However, given the subject, please hold." Sarah's heart pounded in the silence. She was in a high-stakes poker game, and she had just played her only card. After what felt like an eternity, the assistant returned. "Mr. Reed's personal secretary, Ms. Albright, will meet with you," she said. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., at the cafe in the Botanical Gardens. She will be holding a copy of Meditations." The password and the neutral location confirmed it. She was in. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Mr. Thompson's paranoia was escalating. He was now certain that the mysterious Mr. Black had left something of value behind, and that Sarah had found it. He began a campaign of quiet, relentless harassment. He would appear silently behind her as she cleaned, inspecting her work for the slightest flaw. He assigned her the most difficult, messiest rooms. He cut her hours, citing budgetary cutbacks, a move designed to squeeze her financially and force her to reveal what she had found. "You look tired, Sarah," he said one afternoon, his voice a slick, false sympathy. "Working 2 jobs is hard. A person might be tempted to find an easier way to make ends meet." His eyes flickered with a greedy, knowing light. "If you ever find anything, you know the protocol." The hotel is very generous with its rewards for honest employees. The threat was clear. Give me what you found, and I'll give you a small piece of it. Defy me, and I will destroy you. The pressure was immense. Every time she walked past the rusted door of the linen closet in the sub-basement, she felt a jolt of fear. The suitcase was a time bomb, and she knew she was running out of time. The meeting at the Botanical Gardens was a tense, surreal affair. Ms. Albright was an older, impeccably dressed woman with eyes that missed nothing. She sat at a small, secluded table, the worn copy of Meditations placed neatly beside her teacup. Sarah sat down, her heart pounding. She did not start with the suitcase. She started with the truth, or at least a version of it. She spoke of her son, of his college tuition, of her struggle to make ends meet. She spoke of her belief in honesty, a principle that had been drilled into her by her late mother. And then, she laid out the story. She told of finding the suitcase, of its impossible contents, and of her profound distrust of her manager. To follow the rules, she said, her voice quiet but firm, would have been to participate in a theft. I could not do that. The only other option was to find the owner myself, to ensure that what was his was returned to him. Ms. Albright listened in a profound, unbroken silence. She did not take notes. She simply watched, her sharp, intelligent eyes gauging Sarah's character, her sincerity, her soul. When Sarah was finished, Ms. Albright was quiet for a long moment. "You have taken an incredible risk, Miss Jenkins," she said finally. "A risk that could have cost you your job and landed you in a great deal of trouble." "Some things are more important than a job," Sarah replied simply. Ms. Albright nodded slowly. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Mr. Reed agrees," she said. "He will meet with you. Tonight. At the hotel. He will come to your place of work. Be in the main lobby at 10 p.m. The test was not over. Now, she had to face the ghost himself. Title: The Housekeeper's Ledger. The Grand Majestic Hotel at 10 p.m. was a different world. The daytime chaos of tourists and business meetings had subsided, replaced by the low, intimate hum of the evening. The grand lobby, lit by the warm, golden glow of chandeliers, was mostly empty, a vast, silent stage. Sarah stood near the grand piano, her hands clasped, her heart a steady, rhythmic drum. She was not in her uniform. She wore the same simple, dark dress she had worn to the Botanical Gardens, a quiet armor of dignity. She was no longer a housekeeper on the clock. She was a woman waiting for a reckoning. At precisely 10 o'clock, a black town car pulled up to the hotel's main entrance. The doorman, accustomed to the city's elite, rushed to open the door. But the man who stepped out was not a flashy celebrity or a powerful politician. It was the same quiet, elderly man in the simple tweed coat who had sat in her section just days before. Elias Reed had returned, not as a ghost, but as himself. He walked into the lobby, his intelligent blue eyes scanning the space until they found Sarah. He approached her, not with the arrogance of a billionaire, but with the quiet, measured steps of a man who was used to observing the world, not commanding it. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Thank you for meeting me." "Mr. Reed," she replied, her own voice steady. "The suitcase is safe." "I never doubted it," he said, and she knew he was telling the truth. "My assistant, Ms. Albright, was profoundly impressed by you. As was I." He gestured towards a pair of plush armchairs in a secluded corner of the lobby. "May we?" They sat, two unlikely figures in the opulent, empty space. The reclusive billionaire and the invisible housekeeper, bound by $1 million secret. "Before we proceed," Reed began, his gaze direct and piercing, "I feel I owe you an explanation. The suitcase, the money, it was not forgotten by accident. It was left by design." Sarah listened, her expression calm, though her heart began to beat a little faster. "I have reached a certain point in my life," Reed continued, a weary, philosophical tone entering his voice, "where I have begun to question the nature of the world I inhabit. A world of immense wealth, where loyalty is bought and integrity is a commodity. I had grown cynical. I began to believe that every person had a price, that honesty was a fairy tale for children." He leaned forward, his eyes filled with a sad, intense honesty. "So, I decided to conduct an experiment, a quiet, personal test. In 3 different cities, over the past year, I have left behind a similar suitcase, filled with a life-changing amount of untraceable cash. I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to find one person, just one, who would do the right thing when they believed no one was watching. He paused, a humorless smile touching his lips. In New York, the hotel manager and head of security divided the money between themselves and erased the security footage. In London, a housekeeper turned the bag over to her superior, who then claimed a guest had reported it stolen and pocketed the entire amount. In Tokyo, the bag simply vanished, never to be seen again. In every instance, greed won. The system, and the people within it, were corrupt. He looked at Sarah, and his expression softened. And then, there was you. You not only found the money, but you correctly identified that the system was corrupt and took it upon yourself, at great personal risk, to bypass that system in order to do the right thing. You did not just pass my test, Miss Jenkins. You shattered it. You are the one honest person I was beginning to believe no longer existed. Sarah was speechless. This had not been about a lost suitcase. It had been a quest, a billionaire's strange, lonely search for a single, honest soul. My manager, Mr. Thompson, she said finally, finding her voice. He is one of those people. I am aware, Reed said, his voice hardening slightly. I have made a few quiet inquiries since my assistant's meeting with you. Mr. Thompson has a long history of profiting from the honesty of his staff. That is a problem I intend to correct. What do you want from me, Mr. Reed? Sarah asked. First, he said, I want to return your property. He gestured to a bellhop, who brought over a slim, leather briefcase. Reed opened it. Inside was a single, neat stack of $100 bills. This is a finder's fee, a reward for your integrity. It is 10% of the contents of the suitcase. $100,000. Sarah stared at the money. It was more than she made in 2 years. It was a lifeline. It was her son's future, safe and secure. But she shook her head. I cannot accept that, sir, she said quietly. I did not do this for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. To accept money for it would make it something else. Elias Reed stared at her, and for the first time in their conversation, he looked genuinely, profoundly shocked. He had expected her to be grateful, perhaps even to bargain for more. He had never expected her to refuse. In that moment, he knew his search was truly over. He had not just found an honest person. He had found a person for whom integrity was more valuable than wealth. Then what can I do for you, Miss Jenkins? He asked, his voice now filled with a deep, genuine respect. You have restored a piece of my faith in humanity. That is a debt I feel I must repay. Please, tell me what you need. Sarah thought of her son, of his tuition bills, of the constant, grinding worry that was her life's companion. But she also thought of the quiet dignity that was her only real possession. There is one thing, she said finally. My son, he is a brilliant boy, studying engineering. The only thing holding him back is the cost. If you were willing to anonymously fund a scholarship in his name, so that he could finish his education without the burden of debt, that would be more than enough. That would be everything. Elias Reed looked at the woman before him, a woman who, when offered a fortune for herself, had instead asked only for the future of her child. And he knew what he had to do. Elias Reed looked at Sarah, and in his sharp, intelligent eyes, she saw a flicker of something she had not expected, profound, respectful admiration. He had offered her a fortune, a simple, transactional reward for her honesty, and she had countered with a request that was entirely selfless. She had not asked for a handout. She had asked for an investment in her son's future, a gift that would empower rather than simply enrich. A scholarship, he said, the words tasting new in his mouth. Of course, consider it done. The Reed Foundation will establish a full, 4-year scholarship in your son's name at his university, covering all tuition and living expenses. It will be entirely anonymous, as you wish. He paused, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. But that is not enough. A gesture of that magnitude, it requires a proper response. Your integrity is not a small thing, Miss Jenkins. It should not be met with a small reward. He stood up, his demeanor shifting from the quiet philosopher to the decisive, powerful man who had built an empire. First, he said, we will correct the immediate injustice. Where is your manager, Mr. Thompson's office? The confrontation was a masterpiece of quiet, brutal efficiency. Sarah led Elias to the manager's office, a small, cluttered room that smelled of cheap air freshener. Mr. Thompson was on the phone, his feet up on his desk, laughing loudly with a supplier about a delayed shipment. When he saw Sarah enter, his face tightened with annoyance. When he saw the old man in the tweed coat enter behind her, he became openly hostile. "This is a staff-only area," he snapped, swinging his feet to the floor. "Ma'am, I don't know who your friend is, but you are in violation of at least 3 hotel policies right now." Elias Reed simply stood there, his hands in his pockets, and looked around the small, tacky office. He looked at the cheap, laminated desk, at the motivational posters on the wall, and finally, at the smug, arrogant man behind the desk. "You must be Mr. Thompson," Elias said, his voice a low, calm rumble. "I am the guest who stayed in the presidential suite, the one who left a suitcase behind." Thompson's expression shifted from anger to a sudden, wild, greedy excitement. His eyes darted from Elias to Sarah, and a triumphant smirk spread across his face. "You," he exclaimed. "I knew it. I knew she was hiding something." He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. "She found your bag, didn't she? And she tried to keep it for herself. I'll have her fired immediately, sir. Arrested, even. The dishonesty of some people." "No," Elias said, his voice cutting through Thompson's tirade like a blade. "She did not try to keep it. She did something far more remarkable. She protected it. From you." He stepped closer to the desk, and for the first time, Thompson seemed to sense the immense, quiet power of the man before him. "I know all about you, Mr. Thompson," Elias continued, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "I know about the watches, the wallets, the manager's fees from the lost and found. I know that you have cultivated a culture of fear and petty corruption in this otherwise fine establishment. And I know that you were attempting to intimidate Ms. Jenkins into handing over my property, which you had every intention of stealing." The color drained from Thompson's face. That's a lie," he stammered. "Is it?" Elias replied. "I am the majority shareholder of the investment group that owns this hotel, Mr. Thompson. I have just authorized a full, top-to-bottom forensic audit of your entire tenure as manager. Tell me, what do you think they will find?" Thompson collapsed into his chair as if his bones had turned to water. He was finished. Elias turned to Sarah. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice now warm. "I believe I have a job opening for a new general manager at this hotel. Someone with impeccable integrity, a deep understanding of the staff's needs, and a proven commitment to doing the right thing, even at great personal risk. The position comes with a significant salary increase, full benefits, and a corner office with a much better view. Are you interested?" Sarah was speechless. The world was tilting on its axis again, but this time, in a way she had never imagined possible. From a housekeeper to the general manager of a 5-star hotel in the space of an evening. "And one more thing," Elias said, placing a simple, elegant envelope on the desk. "This is not a reward. This is an investment. The deed to a 3-bedroom apartment in a quiet, safe neighborhood near your son's university. The first year of his tuition has also been prepaid. I believe a young man's future is a far better use for that money than a dusty suitcase." A year later, the Grand Majestic Hotel was a different place. Under the quiet, steady leadership of its new general manager, Sarah Jenkins, the culture of fear had been replaced by one of mutual respect. The staff was happier, the service was better, and the hotel was more profitable than ever. Mr. Thompson was a distant, unpleasant memory. Sarah stood in her new, spacious office, looking out at the city skyline. On her desk was a framed photograph of her son on his university campus, his face bright with a future that was no longer a struggle, but a promise. Her phone rang. It was Elias Reed. "Just calling to see how my favorite hotel manager is doing," he said, his voice a warm, familiar rumble. "I'm doing well, Elias," she said, a genuine smile in her voice. "And how is my favorite philanthropist?" "I am well," he said. "My faith in humanity, thanks to a certain housekeeper, has been fully restored." They spoke for a few more minutes, two unlikely friends, bound by an act of quiet, profound integrity. That evening, Sarah walked through the grand lobby of her hotel. She saw a young, nervous-looking housekeeper struggling with a heavy cart and stopped to help, offering a quiet word of encouragement. She was no longer a ghost in the hallways. She was the heartbeat of the house. She had been tested, and she had not been found wanting. She had been given a choice between $1,000,000 and her own integrity, and she had learned that the true value of things could never be measured in cash. It could only be measured by the quiet, steady tally of a life lived with honor. How many of us are faced with small, quiet choices every day that test the very foundation of our character? And what might be possible, what worlds might be changed, if we chose not the easy path, but the right one? If this story about the quiet power of integrity moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. You never know whose honest act might be the one that changes everything.